My name is Matthew Anderson, and I'm a 35-year-old electrical engineer who's worked for DTE Energy in Detroit for the past decade. I've always been the rational type, the guy who believes in logic, science, and reasonable explanations for everything. At least that's who I was before the night of the massive blackout that hit Detroit last winter. What I experienced that night changed everything I thought I knew about our world and what exists within it. It was December 14th, one of those brutally cold Michigan nights where the temperature dips well below freezing and the wind cuts through your clothes like tiny knives. I had been called in for an emergency shift after reports of power fluctuations across the eastern grid. The forecast warned of an incoming ice storm, and we were all on high alert. "Matt, we need you to check the substation on Connor Avenue," my supervisor, Frank, told me over the phone around 6 p.m. "We're getting strange readings, and with this weather coming in, we can't risk a cascade failure." I remember sighing as I looked out my apartment window at the dark clouds rolling in. "I'll head out right away," I replied, already reaching for my heavy work jacket and emergency kit. The Connor Avenue substation sits in an industrial area that borders an old, abandoned manufacturing district. Even during the day, it's isolated. At night, especially during a storm, it feels like you're at the edge of the world. As I pulled up in my company truck, fat snowflakes were already starting to fall, glowing orange in the security lights. I had just begun my inspection when the first transformer blew. The sound was like a thunderclap, and the flash briefly turned night into day. Then, in a cascade effect I'd only read about in textbooks, the entire grid began to fail. Lights across the Detroit skyline winked out in patches, then whole sections, until the city fell into darkness. My radio erupted with panicked voices from the control center as backup systems failed to engage. "Matthew, do you copy? The whole east side is down. We're losing the central grid too." I was about to respond when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the electrical hums and the howling wind. It was a deep, guttural growl that raised every hair on my body. At first I thought it might be a stray dog. Detroit has its share of strays, some dangerous from neglect and hunger. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and swept the beam across the substation yard. Nothing. Then the security lights, running on their own emergency power, flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness, with only my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the black. The snow was coming down harder now, reducing visibility to mere feet. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of something heavy moving across the gravel. I began walking quickly back to my truck, radioing in as I moved. "I think there's someone or something at the Connor station. I'm heading out and will check back when—" I never finished that sentence. Something massive crashed into the chain-link fence about 20 yards ahead of me, making the metal shriek and bend. My flashlight beam caught it for just a second. A hulking shape, too large to be a man, too strangely proportioned to be any animal I recognized. Logic told me to run, but curiosity held me for a fatal moment longer. I adjusted my flashlight, and that's when I saw it clearly for the first time. Standing nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs was what I can only describe as a werewolf, though that word seems insufficient for the horror I witnessed. Its body was a grotesque hybrid of man and wolf, covered in matted dark fur, slick with what looked like oil or blood. Its chest was broad and misshapen, with ribs that seemed to shift beneath its skin as it breathed. But it was the face that still haunts me, elongated into a snout filled with yellowed teeth, each as long as my index finger, and eyes that glowed an unnatural amber in the beam of my flashlight. It didn't howl like the werewolves of movies. It made a sound far worse, a rasping, choking noise that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so obviously inhuman. I ran. The truck was maybe 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. I could hear it pursuing me, its heavy footfalls crunching on the snow and gravel. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, frantically scooped them up with fingers numbed by fear as much as cold. Just as I got the door open, it struck. A massive clawed hand, paw, slammed into my back, sending me sprawling into the truck cab. Pain exploded across my shoulders where its claws had raked through my jacket and into flesh. I kicked the door shut behind me, A move that likely saved my life as the creature slammed into the side of the vehicle, rocking it on its wheels. Through the window, I could see its face pressed against the glass, jaws working as if it were already tasting me. The glass began to crack under the pressure. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into reverse, then drive, fishtailing in the snow as I tore out of the substation yard. In the rearview mirror, I could see the creature loping after me, moving with terrible speed despite its bulk. I made it back to the main road and floored it, heart hammering in my chest. The radio was silent now. The blackout had apparently affected our communication systems as well. I was alone, injured, and being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. The city was in chaos. Without traffic lights, intersections had become dangerous free-for-alls. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency services tried to respond to what must have been hundreds of calls. I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere with people and light. I headed for the Emergency Operations Center downtown, which would be running on generator power. As I drove, I kept checking the mirrors, convinced I would see that thing following me. But the streets behind me remained empty except for the occasional panicked driver. The pain in my back was intensifying, and I could feel blood soaking through my shirt. What if the legends were true? What if I would turn into one of those things at the next full moon? The thought made me lightheaded with terror. When I reached the operations center, it was a scene of controlled chaos. Officials from various agencies were trying to coordinate a response to the blackout. I stumbled in, probably looking like a madman with my torn jacket and wild eyes. "I need help," I managed to say before nearly collapsing. 2 security guards caught me and called for a medic. "What happened to you?" one of them asked, eyeing the blood now visible on my clothing. "Something attacked me at the Connor substation," I said, suddenly aware of how insane the truth would sound. "An animal of some kind." The medic who examined me looked grim. "These aren't animal claw marks," he said. "They're too precise. Looks more like someone attacked you with a weapon." I knew what I had seen, but I also knew what would happen if I started talking about werewolves. So I nodded and let them think it was a human attacker. Maybe someone taking advantage of the blackout to commit crimes. They patched me up and wanted to send me to a hospital, but all the hospitals were overwhelmed with blackout-related emergencies. Instead, I was given antibiotics and told to go home and rest. Home was the last place I wanted to be. What if that thing had followed my scent? What if it was waiting for me? But I had nowhere else to go, and exhaustion was setting in as the adrenaline wore off. My apartment building was dark when I arrived, the hallways illuminated only by emergency lighting. I climbed the 4 flights to my unit, jumping at every shadow and sound. Once inside, I barricaded the door with furniture and checked every closet and corner, flashlight and kitchen knife in hand. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the couch, too wired to sleep but too exhausted to remain standing. The scratches on my back throbbed, and I wondered if infection, or something worse, was already spreading through my system. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. The blackout had plunged Detroit into a primal state, a city without the protective barrier of electric light against the dark and what lurked within it. I must have dozed off despite my fear, because I woke with a start to a sound at my window, the scrape of claws on glass. I froze, not daring to move or even breathe. My apartment was on the 4th floor. Nothing should have been able to reach my window. Nothing human, that is. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound. Through the blinds, I could see a silhouette, massive shoulders, pointed ears, that same elongated snout. It was clinging to the brick exterior of the building somehow, its amber eyes fixed on me through the slats in the blinds. It knew where I lived. It had tracked me here. I lunged for my phone to call 911, but of course, with the power out across the city, cell service was spotty at best. The call wouldn't go through. The scratching at the window intensified, and I heard the glass begin to crack. I had minutes, maybe seconds. My gaze fell on the gas fireplace, the only source of heat with the electricity out. An idea formed, born of desperate terror. I turned the gas on full but didn't light it. The hissing filled the room as I backed toward my bedroom. The window shattered inward, and the creature squeezed its massive form through the opening, shards of glass tearing at its fur, but seeming to cause it no pain. It fixed those terrible eyes on me and moved forward with predatory intent. I struck a match and threw it toward the fireplace. The explosion wasn't massive. Gas fireplaces have safety features, but it was enough. A fireball erupted, catching the creature full in its face and chest. It made that terrible laughing sound again, but this time it was clearly a howl of pain. Its fur ignited, and it thrashed around my living room, setting fire to the furniture, the curtains. I ran for the door, tearing aside the barricade I had created, and fled into the hallway. Behind me, flames began to engulf my apartment, and smoke billowed out into the corridor. I pulled the fire alarm, then pounded on doors, shouting for everyone to get out. As the building evacuated, I stood across the street watching the flames climb higher. Fire trucks arrived remarkably quickly given the chaos in the city, and I watched as firefighters battled the blaze. There was no sign of the creature emerging from the building, burning or otherwise. Had I killed it, or had it escaped somehow? The blackout lasted for 3 days. They blamed it on the ice storm, bringing down critical transmission lines, coupled with a cascade failure in the grid's protection systems. A perfectly reasonable, scientific explanation. Except I know what I saw at that substation. I know what followed me home. In the weeks that followed, I searched for any reports of similar sightings, any unusual animal attacks during the blackout. There were a few, people claiming to have seen a large animal in areas where no such animal should have been. A few unexplained deaths attributed to wild animal attacks, unusual in the heart of a major city. My wounds healed, leaving jagged scars that the doctors still insist and came from some kind of weapon, not claws. I didn't transform at the next full moon, or the one after that, dispelling at least that particular fear. But I've changed in other ways. I sleep with lights on now. I've installed heavy security bars on my new apartment's windows. I've taken to carrying silver, not because I necessarily believe it would work, but because having some defense, even a symbolic one, helps me sleep at night. The official report on the blackout makes no mention of damage to the Connor Avenue substation fence, though I know what I saw. Sometimes I drive by there, always during daylight hours, and look at the repaired section. Evidence, however small, that what happened that night was real. Most nights, I still dream of amber eyes watching me through the blinds, of teeth and claws and that terrible choking laughter. I wake up drenched in sweat, reaching for the lights, because I know now what lurks in the darkness when the lights go out. I know what walks the streets of Detroit during blackouts, when the thin veneer of civilization is temporarily stripped away, and I live with the constant fear that someday the lights will go out again, and it will be waiting.